Good evening, everyone. My name is Harry Sale, class of 1992, and it is my pleasure to serve as the Alumni Executive Board President. I'd like to welcome Mr. Shelton, our distinguished faculty, faculty emeriti, and special guests here tonight as we do the unveiling of the 12th portrait in a series of faculty portraits that are on display here in the dining hall. The portrait series was created by the Alumni Executive Board in 2005 to honor MUS faculty members who have dedicated themselves and their lives in service to the school. There have been many changes in the appearance of the campus over the last 2 decades, and these portraits serve as a daily reminder to alumni, students, faculty, and friends that even though the school may change in its appearance, over time our faculty has supplied consistency year after year and provided the essential foundation on which the academic excellence of MUS rests. The Alumni Board determined the criteria for selecting each faculty portrait recipient. To qualify, nominees cannot be a current member of the faculty and must have served MUS for 15 years minimum or be retired from the school. We're here this evening to honor longtime teacher Terry N. Shelton, whom the Alumni Board selected as this year's subject in the Faculty Portrait Series. For nearly 4 decades, legions of lower school students have feared Mr. Shelton and his red pen. Yet miraculously, they become his biggest fans after going to college and realizing they knew how to write. I'd had Mr. Shelton in 8th grade, and I remember a few things about him. First of all, he had a really quick wit. His classes were always very educational, obviously, but they're also quite entertaining. He had a tremendous passion for English, as you would expect, and he had a very good control of his classroom. I remember one time we had a group that was being a little unruly in the back of the class, and Mr. Shelton kind of snapped at us and then said, if anybody wants to come up here and take control of this classroom, we're going to have a little fist fight. and there were no takers, and we still aren't really sure if he was bluffing or not.
Must have been.
Anyway, our first speaker is Mr. Andy McCarroll, a member of the class of 1986. As a student at MUS, Andy was a varsity athlete in track and football. He helped bring home the state championship football trophy in 1985. He was a president of the Honor Council, a National Merit Commended student, and the recipient at his graduation of the Faculty Cup for General Excellence, the highest academic award given at Memphis University School. After MUS, he earned his undergraduate degree in English from Vanderbilt University. He returned to Memphis in the fall of 1990 and joined the faculty here at MUS and taught English and history for 2 years before heading back to Vanderbilt and getting his law degree. Andy is vice president and general counsel for Southeastern Asset Management and recently stepped down as a member of the MUS Board of Trustees after 11 years of distinguished service. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy McCarroll.
Thank you, Harry, and while I get out my papers, I have a story quickly that's not planned, but I did ask my brother Mac, who was in Terry's first 8th grade English class, if he had any comments, and he said, I walked in and there was this short guy, but he said he was in the Navy, and he looked at me so just harshly that I sat down and didn't say a word, and that's saying a lot when you know my brother Mac. It's my privilege tonight, on behalf of hundreds of MUS students over 4 decades, to say thank you to Terry Shelton. There's no way in 2 or 3 minutes to honor and thank a man who spent countless hours giving his students thoughtful, individual, incisive guidance. This guidance came with a slashing red pen. It came with challenging wit and a pinch of sarcasm. But the most important thing it came with was a willingness to take the time to do the job well. With the help of Elizabeth Crosby on my assumptions, I tried to estimate the number of hours Mr. Shelton spent outside the classroom just grading papers, not including office hours with students, not including class preparation time. Using conservative assumptions, if you totaled the number of hours Terry spent grading papers and then assumed he spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week grading, he would have been sitting in that chair for over 2 years straight. Not only did Terry take the fond memories. Not only did Terry take the time to do the job well himself, he taught us to do the same. Each day in class, word by word, phrase by phrase, he and we patiently broke down parts of speech and word functions, time-consuming, methodical training necessary to prepare us for future success. 35 years ago, when I was in the 8th grade, before he wrote the Owl English Handbook with Jim Russell, each correction was accompanied by a reference to chapters and sections of the Harbrace Handbook. I can see him now pacing up and down the rows and in front of the class with a military cadence, stating corrections and references sharply, matter-of-factly, but no anger or frustration that we weren't getting it. That's a dependent clause functioning as a direct object, 10C. Subject-verb agreement, 6A. A comma, non-restrictive appositive, 12D. Future perfect progressive tense, 7B. We tried to keep up hundreds of sentences over and over, reviewing them for potential issues. His patience in instruction and endurance of mind let us know that he would stick with us if we could stick with him. No detail was too small, no misplaced comma too immaterial. Each must be addressed with care and correctness. To this day, every time I pause and reach for the dictionary or thesaurus, I'm reminded of Terry, who would often stop in the middle of class, reach for the dictionary, make us watch him turn the pages to get to a word, and we would wait for the result. He made it clear that there are no shortcuts in the pursuit of excellence, and if necessary, take several minutes just to find the right word. The papers, of course, are legendary. I had no idea until I tried it myself for 2 years how difficult it is to establish a mind meld with an 8th grader while trying to decipher his handwriting. Terry somehow mastered this. He discerned where meandering prose was trying to go, and with a startling lightning bolt, captured it in a few words. While it took time, over time, we began to see. We began to learn the habits of writing with clarity, concision, and directness. Equally as important and a prerequisite to clear writing is clear thinking. Terry engaged our 8th grade minds as our neural pathways were still being formed. I can only imagine the faces he might make as he sought to figure out where a paper was trying to go. But he persevered, and he showed us the way. To say that he shaped our minds is not a metaphor, it's a reality. And he shaped them to be capable of engaging complex topics, analyzing them, breaking them down, and then presenting them in a coherent manner. In our rapidly changing world, this skill is essential for all of us, whether we're writers or not. If you were lucky as I was, you might get Mr. Shelton again in the upper school, where we honed our thinking and writing skills further as we opened our minds to engage authors and poets in the historical, personal, creative contexts that inspired them to write. No class I had as an English major at Vanderbilt comes close to those I had with Mr. Shelton, or the rest of the English department at MUS for that matter. Milton Myeroff, in his book On Caring, one of the most personally impactful books I've ever read, states in line 1 of the introduction, to care for another person in the most significant sense is to help him grow and actualize himself. In this crucial sense, Terry Shelton is one of the most caring people I've ever known. His caring did not always feel good to us or our parents. But his patience and perseverance was invaluable in helping us to realize our potential. Initially in the details of grammar and the challenges of writing, but that same discipline to seek the right word, to think clearly and carefully through complex facts, now pays off when a meticulous surgeon, a computer programmer, investment analyst, lawyer, and the like practice their crafts with excellence and confidence. As the sun sets on this evening in October, I think of Octobers of days gone by, when boys were not yet men, and they wondered if they were up to the challenges of the day. Our love of MUS and our love of Terry Shelton come from our appreciation that they challenged us, they shaped us to be the men we are today. Thank you, Terry Shelton, and thank you, MUS.
Thank you, Andy. Next up, I'm pleased to call on Mrs. Elizabeth Crosby. Mrs. Crosby joined the English faculty in 1995 and knows Mr. Shelton as a friend, a colleague, and as his boss. She is the chair of the English department, a role she assumed in 2014. Eminently popular with her students, Mrs. Crosby was selected by the senior class in 2005 to receive the John M. Nail Award for outstanding teaching. Then in 2009, she was recognized by her peers with the Distinguished Teaching Award. Mrs. Crosby is the mother of Andrew Crosby, class of 2014, and the stepmother of Reed Barnes, class of 2016. Please welcome to the podium Elizabeth Crosby.
Terry Shelton is a legend. You all know this. You've seen his Most Interesting Man in the World photograph parody on behalf of the MUS Annual Fund. Maybe you've made the pilgrimage to his 8th grade classroom to meditate on the shrine to him there. Or you could be one of the students, my son among them, who one day spontaneously formed a fan tunnel for him to walk beneath on his way to class. Perhaps you're in the group of students who lobbied to have a statue of him placed in the upper school courtyard. If you're one of Michelle Cruz's current 8th grade students who are among the first boys not to have met him, but who definitely know of him, you've begged her to invite Mr. Shelton to visit so that you can just look at the man who wrote grammar practice sentences for them involving subjects and appositives like Murgatroyd ham hockey, Elaine Rigatuni, Myrtle Fifgiggle, Mrs. Ramble Schnook, and Dr. Ramalama Ding Dong. In his announcement to homerooms over the intercom this morning, Mr. Hagewood told the students that Mr. Shelton's portrait would be unveiled this evening. My homeroom, seniors who were taught by him in the 8th grade, burst into applause. You've heard the stories. Many of you have lived the stories. Anyone, though, who is a former student or who is a colleague or a friend has been deeply touched and permanently changed for the better because of a relationship with Terry Shelton. Terry and I have a long-going joke about the fact that we can't go anywhere in Memphis together without an MUS alumnus, like Andy, approaching us and telling Terry that Terry literally changed his life as a writer, as a reader, as a thinker, as a person. Terry listens and nods as if this were not something he hears every single time he runs an errand or goes out to lunch. And then magically recalls the hilarious nickname he had for the alum when he was an 8th grader 20 years ago and casually drops it into the conversation. Part of the joke Terry and I have about this interaction is that the alum, whom I also taught, will inevitably suddenly notice me and say something like, "Oh, hi, Miss Crosby," and leave it at that. I think that's Terry's favorite part of this ritual regarding his transformative impact on his students. If you're lucky enough to be among Terry's former students, you remember well the legendary red ink-stained essays, relics of which are part of the shrine to him in the lower school. Terry was indeed, as Jim Russell remembers, quote, the founder of the Red Ink Society, a taskmaster with students, the absolute arbiter of our language, and an opponent of illiteracy and of the trivial or thoughtless in speech and writing, end quote. In fact, it was with Jim that Terry co-authored the English department's grammar book, the famous, infamous, and amazing Owl English Handbook, the OEH, which Flip Eichner calls, quote, an MUS institution and pedagogical treasure, in use in our English classes since it was published in 1985, as well as in the offices of alumni all over the country. As much as Terry demanded of his students, he was always there to help them improve as readers and writers, regularly meeting them before school, during free periods, and after school. There were countless times over the years that we department friends asked Terry to go out with us after school, and he would say, well, maybe later, But first, I'm meeting with Sam, or Will, or George. There was always a student in Terry's office, sitting beside him at the desk, being walked through grammar rules in the OEH again, or through yet another draft of his essay. Flip observes that colleagues, quote, regularly lauded Terry's dedication, his love of teaching, his discipline, and his idealism. To hear Terry talk, though, it was none of these, all of which he dismisses as not anything particularly special. It was simply obligation to the contract he had signed with the school. He figured all teachers owed the same. Flip goes on to assert that we all know what this kind of dedication really was, though: integrity. Terry is certainly a friend of our minds. He is also a dear friend of our hearts. As Lynn Askew says, quote, Terry's rather daunting manner, at least to students, conceals that he is a total softy underneath. Terry's soft heart, as well as his integrity, draws his friends to him. All of us fortunate enough to call him friend have experienced his devotion and ready faithfulness, his presence for life's moments of joy. Uncle Terry is well known to our children as the giver of silly and mysterious gifts, such as stuffed buffalo, flashlights, feathers, and messages that need decoding. Terry is also a steady presence when we are hurting, such as when he finds one of our children in a hospital, or one of us in a hospital, or one of us simply at home needing the support of a friend. Terry quickly and easily offers a loaf of his favorite farmer's market bread, a ready ear, and a sympathetic heart. At other times, between life's joys and sorrow, the most of the time we live in, Terry's friends love him because he is simply a delight to be around. He's happy to introduce you to his favorite hamburger dive or to pass the afternoon on your porch. The only thing I've ever discovered that he won't do for a friend is wear a costume to your come as your favorite literary character party. He'll join the party, though more reasonably dressed in jeans and an untucked shirt, sort of keeping to himself his bemusement that people he actually loves have gone to the ridiculous trouble to regale themselves as Hazel Motes, Hester Prynne, or Shakespeare's fool. Terry is wickedly intelligent, and as Flip points out, quote, has never suffered fools gladly, but he certainly suffers them, suffers us with a sense of humor. I'm so glad that Terry's portrait is going to hang here in this room, among other faculty legends: Lee McQueen, John Murray Springfield, Bill Hatchett, Jake Rudolph, Betty Jo Higgs, Skip Daniel, Mike Dedrick, Jerry Peters, John Harkins, Jim Russell, and Andy Saunders. Terry Shelton's presence here in this room will remind us faculty to aspire to personal and professional integrity in this intentional, careful work which we have chosen to do, as he did, year by year, day by day, class by class, minute by minute. Terry's presence here will also remind us and the students not to take ourselves too seriously. Look at Terry's face in the portrait when it's unveiled. He has an essay and red pen in hand, engaged in the serious work of teaching, but he's smiling and just about to wink at us.
Thank you. Our portrait of Mr. Shelton is by renowned artist Chris Saper, who planned to be here with us this evening but unfortunately was unable to travel at the last minute. Since beginning her painting career in 1991, Ms. Saper has completed almost 400 commissioned portraits nationally, authored 4 books, and filmed 4 DVDs on portraiture. In addition to her portrait commission schedule, she is an active public speaker and painting demonstrator. She has served on the faculty of the Portrait Society of America and has taught portraiture at the Scottsdale Artists School, the Mountain Artists Guild in Prescott, Arizona, and the Connecticut Society of Portrait Artists. Ms. Saper has exhibited at the U.S. Senate Rotunda, the Salmagundi Club, and the National Arts Club in New York City, the Bennington Center for the Arts, the Temple Arts Center, and the Insight Gallery in Fredericksburg, Texas. A native of Wisconsin, she holds a bachelor's degree in fine arts and a master's degree in healthcare administration. She has lived in Phoenix, Arizona since 1977. Ms. Saper is represented locally by Ms. Elizabeth Francis, a broker for Portraits Incorporated out of Birmingham, Alabama. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Shelton to join Mr. Hagewood and me as we unveil the portrait. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Let me.
Not yet. It's all a joke, right?
It's all a joke.
It is. Yeah, I need no introduction.
I'm deeply grateful to Mr. Perry DeMint, our peerless Director of Advancement, for suggesting over a decade ago that we create a faculty portrait series. And I commend our Alumni Executive Board for embracing the idea and then committing energy and resources to the faculty portraits that you see around you. Those portraits remind us each day of distinguished teachers who have helped make MUS a great school, teachers who have a revered place in the hearts of our alumni. And I'm very happy that our alumni have chosen Terry Shelton this year to know that his portrait will hang with those of old friends and colleagues. In these portraits, great teachers remain forever as they were. They remain as we remember them, vigorous, youthful, timeless. And in our celebration today of Terry Shelton, would remind you that he joined the faculty mid-year in January 1978, retired in 2015 after 38 years of service and leadership here. Now, most alumni, as has already been remarked, remember him as an 8th grade English teacher. Others remember him best as an upper school English teacher who at times taught an elective in 20th century literature, British literature, taught junior English review at times, advanced placement English. But I think perhaps the lower school 8th grade teacher label adheres best because of the scars, real or imagined, that alumni still bear from that early 8th grade encounter. Prior to his life here, Terry earned a BA and an MA in English from Memphis State University, where he was a graduate assistant for 2 years, then an instructor on the faculty. And during those years prior to MUS, at times he was an assistant editor and circulation manager at the old Delta Review and an associate editor at Key magazine. He served in the Naval Reserve for 6 years. During his 38 years on the MUS faculty, he received the Distinguished Teaching Award, the one created by John Murray Springfield, and he held the A. Robert Bolte Chair of Excellence in Teaching, an endowed chair created by a group of our alumni. He also one year received the Presidential Scholars Distinguished Teaching Award for being cited as the most influential teacher in the academic life of one of our student presidential scholars. Outside the classroom over the years, he chaired the awards committee, organized and executed the lower school spelling bee, advised the lower school newspaper and the lower school honor council, and for a short time he edited MUS Today. He'd often be seen, meeting with students before, during, and after school to work over their essays or help them with grammar, help them understand the literature they were reading. And I admired him for the prodigious amount of time he gave beyond the classroom to aid students and the genuine interest he showed in them, even those students with modest ability. Great patience. Besides his outstanding work in the classroom, for me, he was a model faculty member. Comfortable within departmental and school guidelines, always punctual, scrupulous in holding students to school policy and gentlemanly behavior. And he had a superb gift for direct, honest, but non-offensive communication with parents on progress reports or by email or even face-to-face. For example, both Rick Brewer and Clay Smythe tell the story of a father who conferred with Terry on back-to-school day about his son's performance in class. Terry reviewed the boys' quizzes, provided some general feedback, and then said with confidence, quote, "Your son is a good writer," end quote. Praise indeed from any English teacher, but especially from Terry. A few weeks passed, quarter one grades came out. The boy earned a B. The father confronted Mr. Shelton, reminding him of his recent comment about his son's being a good writer. Quote, "Why doesn't my son have an A in your class?" end quote, the father asked, clearly feeling deceived. "Oh, that?" responded Terry. "Yes, well, I said your son is a good writer, as indeed he is. B means good. A means excellent. I didn't say he was an excellent writer." Terry once described an 88, a B+, as, quote, "the ideal grade because the kid who makes an 88 is smart, but it's not going to kill himself if he doesn't make an A." As both speakers have already noticed, he was never without the red pens for use on student essays, or as one student put it, "Red pen in morning, student take warning." Or as Macbeth put it, "the multitudinous C's incarnadine." He always assigned many papers, read them thoroughly, returned them quickly, his markings distinguished by comments that showed the students how to improve. High standards, and he was effective in helping his students attain those standards. Now, more personally, for me, I will remember the pre-heart attack unfiltered Camels, a blend of Virginia and Turkish tobacco. Edward R. Murrow put away 4 packs a day, they say. As writer Tom Robbins put it in Still Life with Woodpeckers, quote, "A pack of Camels is the best friend you have in prison," end quote. And I too will remember Terry's distaste for sports. He once told lower school principal Rick Brewer that he thought the school should begin a poker team and that he would be glad to coach. He was sure it wouldn't cost nearly as much as other sports to fund. No building, no fields, no locker rooms, very little equipment. If the school could stake the team with funds with which to bet, he was confident it would make money for the school. And I will remember the basketball that resided atop his bookcase in his office for years. It was signed by a number of his 8th graders a decade or two ago and presented, in Terry's words, as, quote, a demonstration that they had learned what I had taught them about irony, end quote. He once described himself as 5 feet 4 inches and known famously around the school to dislike all sports, never attending games or matches. Recalling Ulysses' speech to his men in Dante's Purgatorio before their last adventure, quote, "You were not formed to live the life of brutes, but virtue to pursue and knowledge high," end quote. The Owl English Handbook, still very much in use here at MUS, but we get requests from alumni every year who no longer have their copy and want to buy one to use as a reference in their businesses or to settle an argument with their wife or boss about grammar or usage. And I remember his superb knowledge of old films and television shows, especially one particularly memorable Friday assembly in which he analyzed the movie Casablanca for students whose young minds these days are choked and sullied by years of video games and action films. His analyses always erred, however, on the side of generosity, perhaps hagiography, when the female actors in question exuded the attractiveness and sex appeal of a Grace Kelly or an Ingrid Bergman or a Nastasia Kinski. Now, I don't know about this next story. It may be apocryphal, but makes sense. They say Terry's car was rear-ended one day while he was stopped at a traffic light. Not a bad crash, but just dented the bumper. He got out of his vehicle and he said to the other driver, "I am not happy." The man said, "Okay then, which one are you?" It's got to be apocryphal, right? And then brilliant, predictably inappropriate, and wry, says Sally Askew in describing Terry, but very sweet, very generous, very thoughtful. Of course, Terry's friendship with the Askews goes back to graduate school days, and Sally commented, quote, "He's been around since then for all important events, children, weddings, funerals, and crises," end quote. For example, after a concussion at MUS day camp one summer, wasn't wearing a helmet, young Will Askew, son of Sally and Lynn, was having a boring stay at Le Bonheur until Terry arrived, having gone to Millington to get a real Army watch so that Will could be G.I. Joe. Rick Broer said that when he and Jill's daughter Katie was born, Terry was the first to visit in the hospital. Barbara Crippen, friend and colleague for many years, wrote a haiku about Terry for this occasion. And I'll close with this brief tribute, this paean to Terry. By the way, Barbara commented that she was providing it as an example of an assignment that an 8th grader would never see on Mr. Shelton's weekly assignment sheet, the assignment being write a haiku describing your English teacher. This is a haiku for Terry. Curmudgeon's loyal good heart, acid wit's annoying charm, irony. Congratulations, Terry.
Yeah, we'll just, we find my page, man. Okay. This is the portrait. As the walls of the dining hall continue to become lined with the portraits of revered faculty members like Mr. Shelton, who have played an important role and influence in our lives, in the students' lives, we will be constantly reminded of the primary reason we continue to appreciate and support Memphis University School. Mr. Shelton has devoted his life to the students and to the school. His influence will continue to impact so many of us for years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Sale, one of my eighth graders. I want to begin by thanking the four previous speakers for their kind words and to agree emphatically with them that I'm a wonderful person. Mr. Hagewood was a mere peon when I started here, but since his elevation to headmaster 20 years ago, annually he refused to fire me again and again, a sign of his kindness and indulgence, or, depending on one's point of view, his incompetence. Mrs. Crosby and I shared an office for a number of years, and she took over my AP English classes. But perhaps most important to me, she got me to the hospital for my third heart attack and stayed with me all day waiting for me to die. I did not. Mr. McCarroll, I taught JER, 8th grade English, AP English. I think I taught Andy more than I taught anyone else. I think it was 4 different classes altogether. He, memorably for me, as he mentioned, when he finished college, he came back to MUS and taught English and history. He, interestingly, taught 8th grade English in the same classroom in which I had taught him 8th grade English, and I got kind of a kick out of that. Then he went off lawyering for a while, but did come back to serve on our board, more or less taking the spot that his father John had filled for so many years. And Andy's younger brother and sister are currently on our faculty. That kind of renewal of serving MUS after graduation, coming back in one capacity or another, is something I was at MUS long enough to observe closely. Colonel Lynn called it tradition with change. 15% of our current faculty are alums. 2 members of my own English department, Ms. Torrey and Mr. Reese, are my former students. 35 years ago, MUS had on its faculty a Dr. Dahl, a Coach Peters, and a Mr. Saunders. Now we still do. The sons have replaced their retired fathers. So there's a remarkable continuity there. I'm glad they all wound up being Dr., Coach, Mr., so this would work. Also, nearly 40 years ago when I started MUS, the faculty had a Mr. Thompson. But now we still do. Very same one. And when I started MUS, Sammy Graham was a sophomore. He now, of course, is chairman of the Board of Trustees, which is 80% constituted of MUS alums. For the past 15 years or so, I've enjoyed teaching the sons of former students and have been amazed at how much better my former students are as dads than they were as students. Their sons routinely outshine the fathers. So I think our journey here is worth it. Students become teachers and board members and parents, and MUS stays strong thereby through such renewal. I've spent most of my life here. Most of my friends were made here, and I spent most of my time grading essays here. I want to thank Mr. Sale and the fellows of the Alumni Executive Board for bestowing upon me this honor. I want to thank Chris Saper, the artist, for her talent in creating the beautiful portrait, though I understand that the beauty of the model can be inspiring. I would like to thank my colleagues and friends, and especially my former students, for all the favors throughout the years and for your presence here this evening. Many years hence, I hope to espy from wherever I am a pair of new 8th graders walking across here with their lunches, going back to that table in the corner above which I understand my portrait will hang, and one of the seventh graders gazing up at it, turning to his pal and saying, "Who do you figure that old guy was?" So that would be my ultimate reward. But I want to thank you all very, very much for being here this evening and for supporting me all these years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton, and congratulations. On behalf of the members of the Alumni Executive Board, I thank you all for being here tonight. We invite you to stay and visit, and please come up and congratulate Mr. Shelton before you head home. Thank you.